So today I wanted to talk about pro trips. Pro trips. I am bad at pronouncing words. This is terrible. It is late though. My pro tip for the CNA. So I have some scenarios that just based on my experience as a healthcare director, AL director, memory care director, whatever you want to call it, a nurse, and also starting from the CNA arena, there's a lot of situations that I personally have experienced. I've had the individuals that I've supervised tell me they've experienced it. And I just want to give professional tips. Pro tips is what I was trying to say at the beginning. Those pro tips. And I'm going to start with a scenario. What happens when you have a conflict on a job that you are either currently employed by, or you are working maybe from a staffing agency perspective, or you are what we call an independent contractor. So that's usually a role that company that you're working for doesn't provide benefits, and you're just considered your own independent contractor. You're contracted to do that role. And one of our amazing companies that we partner with to speak to our students and employ our students, that is their method. You are that independent contractor. You're in charge of yourself as a professional, but there's always the standards, right, of conduct. And I know conflict happen. Like, we can't eliminate the thought that conflict doesn't happen. It happens. But the question of the day is always, what do we do when it happens? How do we respond? What is our perception of ourselves, the person that's talking to us, and the situation? Those are three different perspectives that always are playing a role in your mind, playing a role in your thoughts and your responses to that circumstances. So number one, the biggest thing that is important for you to do for yourself is to never just walk out. And what I mean by that, let's say your supervisor comes up to you and they believe you didn't provide care or did a task, and you get immediately defensive. It is a normal response, because if you did the job, right, and you're being falsely accused, then you're going to be protective of yourself, and you're almost going to be like, well, why did you think I didn't do it, or whatever? There's so many thoughts that can go on in your mind at that moment. But the question of the day is always going to be you. So all of my pro tips are going to be focused on your perspective of yourself, the employer, supervisor, team member, and your the perception of the whole circumstance, right? Because those are three different things, and they play three different roles in your professional life. Number one, how do you feel? Because that's what shows up usually in the room first, right? After the person says what they have to say, rather if it's a question about the quality of work you did you do it? Are you late? That next response is usually coming from my perspective of how you approached me, right? Do I believe that this person is demeaning me? Because a lot of times that defensive response is coming out this emotion of, you're treating me less than. And you want to show up in that moment because you're going to be defensive and protective of yourself. And also you almost want to prove, like, first of all, let's talk about, like, first of all, you're not going to talk to me like this. And the second thing is that flight or fight response. And that's that response when you like, I'm going to tell you something, and I don't care who you are, and I don't care how this comes out, and I don't care about the consequences. That's your fight response. And that a lot of times is usually that might be the first thing that comes up. It takes time to tame that a little bit and be more, and it's not about taming, but it's really like being like in control of your responses and your perspective, like just your responses, your reaction. Are you more reactive and not proactive in certain situations. So it's that fight or flight sign. So my fight response is, I'm about to tell you something real good. Like, I'm about to devour you with my words, and you're not gonna ever speak to me again in that manner. And I'm gonna walk off, because after I tell you that, I'm probably gonna be heated 10 times more, and I don't want to hit you. I'm just being honest, y'all. These are the things that I felt. These are the things my caregivers have. My colleagues, really, they're my colleagues. I've had the opportunity to supervise them, but they may come in my office when I was a supervisor and be like, Ms. Laura, like this, if you don't get this person, this is what's going to happen. So usually, number one, I'm always like, hey, hold on, take a step back, to sit down, let me know what's happening, right? So your first pro tip is to be aware of your response when you feel as though you're being attacked. You need to rehearse that a few times, and not rehearse it meaning like I need to really experience it, but you need to rehearse it to the point where you start to pay more attention to your thoughts, because our thoughts usually happen first and then our mouth follows, right? If you already in your mind about to curse someone out and be, unprofessional, in that environment, then that's going to be that indication like, wait, let me take a step back. Even if you don't respond in that moment, that is not a sign of weakness. I think sometimes we think if we don't say something now, like in this specific moment, then we're going to be perceived as inadequate, weak. Because to be honest, I'm gonna just say, if you look like me, and this is not an all-inclusive term, and for all-inclusive, everybody that look like me, but I know growing up in the environment that I did, if you didn't do something, people took advantage of that. And I think sometimes we can bring that same mindset in a working environment, and it's not the proper mindset to have. The only person's opinion that matters when it comes to perceived as weak or not is your own. You know who you are. You're an expert in this industry. As a caregiver, you have skills that not everybody, especially those who are not in the industry, have. You are being employed because you have something that they need, that we need, that resident needs. So automatically, there is value. Now, does that mean you're not going to feel devalued in the situation based on how that person approached you? No, you may, because it also depends on how that person is self-aware of how they should communicate when they have questions or concerns about care or whatever the situation is. But it's about you today. So pro tip number one, be self-aware. Rehearse these moments that you've had, if you've experienced it already, and really think about your response. Really think about it. Did you just walk off a job that you really probably could have problem solved that situation a lot better, and not be in a situation where you're waiting for employment and having to go back through that whole process? Sometimes our responses breeds consequences that we're not as aware of. So we keep doing it like it's a self-sabotaging thing. We keep doing it. I was that person. I'm gonna be honest, as a CNA, I was less tolerable of like what I would call nonsense. Like if I didn't feel comfortable, if I didn't feel valued, respected, I would leave. Like I wasn't giving you a notice. I'm just being honest. That was who I was because of the way I thought, and the way that I perceived the situation. So that brings me on to the second perception that you have. And that is, hey, B, and that is the perception of the whole circumstance. Are you truly listening to what the employer said or the supervisor said? Like, honestly, are you truly paying attention? And I'm not saying that you're not, because you may have heard that person fully, but it's something to beg to ask for. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. Have you ever took a test, and because the word looked like a certain word, you assumed that it was that word, but then you put the wrong answer. And then when you went back and reread that question, you're like, duh, like if I would have just took my time to read it, I would have gotten this answer correct. So that perception of the circumstance is similar to this whole idea. Did I hear them correctly? Did I hear them fully? Or did my emotions and my response to the situation just bombard me and bombard the way that I think and perceive it? Did I perceive it incorrectly? Because that person could be saying something that's valid. Now, approach matters. Don't get me wrong. How in which people say things really, really, really matters. Point blank. It does. But sometimes, just like we're talking about professional tips here, that person is not as developed in that situation also. So the way in which they're approaching you may need some correction. Does that mean that in this moment I should be the person correcting them? Maybe, maybe not. It just depends. And I think a lot of times you'll have more room to have those type of discussions with a supervisor if the way in which you approach it comes off a lot better. So you might have more room to open up that discussion if you don't just go off, like, and you don't just be like, forget you, and, because after you do that, it's going to be hard for you to recover from that moment. And as I matured and I grew as a caregiver and now having a family, I had to start to be more aware of how I perceived situation, conflict resolution. How did I perceive it? And why am I in a situation where I'm always looking for another job? And it's not to say that the employer or the person that is talking to you is not responsible. But I have learned it is quicker and better for me to correct and grow up myself. Develop myself is when I say grow up, not grow up meaning just immaturity per se, but just I need to grow up in my profession. I need to grow up in my industry. Then the first person that I can challenge is going to be myself. And it's also going to teach the person that's talking to me how to treat me. Right? So we've talked about the perception that you have of yourself. Do you believe that that person is approaching you in a way that's devaluing and they're just undercutting they're just accusing you and not thinking? I've had that situation, y'all. I'm just being honest. I've had a supervisor come up to me and say, the resident's looking for their wallet. Did you steal it? Like, well, what do you mean? Like, for a person who is not thinking about that and that's not what they do. Like, I'm not trying to be a thief. Why would I be working? I'm just being honest. Why would I even have a job if that's my thing? And that's the way this person approached me from my perception, because you just accused me of stealing. You didn't just say, hey, let me have a conversation with you and let me walk you through what just happened. Do you know anything about that? That would have came off a whole lot different than did you steal it? But that's how this supervisor approached me. And again, I had to learn because I remember asking God, I was like, you know what? I want to stay on my jobs longer because I saw this pattern of behavior. And a lot of time, most of the time, it was because I didn't know how to resolve conflict. And my knee-jerk response was flight. I don't like disrespecting people necessarily. I will tell you how I feel in a more professional manner. But if I don't feel validated in that moment, I would just leave the job, period. I'm just being honest. I can go find another job. That was who I was as a younger adult. I started out in this industry at 16. So I had to grow up in my profession. I had to grow up as a professional, and professional as a nurse, CNA. Like, you don't have to be you're not considered a professional when you become a nurse. You're a professional, period, because you have skills. The third perception after the circumstance is gonna be, how do you think this person perceives you, right? A lot of times our responses are based out of our own misperceptions of how the person perceives us. And I'm not saying that that person, again, cannot have an incorrect perception. I'm not saying that. A lot of times that does happen, but does that mean that I have to? respond emotionally in that moment? Can I, in that moment, just take a breather, listen to them, even if they said it incorrectly and they may have accused or I perceive that they attacked me? Can I respond in a professional manner? Okay, so I understand that you believe I did this. You know, if it's I was tardy and I've been tardy, you know what? I have. And I apologize because I understand that this is not the standard of your company. I know it may not matter to you, but currently, if there is a circumstance that is causing you to be tardy, then bring it up. You don't have to, it's none of their business. But sometimes it helps for people to understand, hey, I'm going through a challenging time. My car broke down and no, I have to bring my child to daycare and they don't open till 6:30. So that's why I'm here at 6:45 and not 6 o'clock. Now, you probably should have disclosed that on the application, but on availability. But ultimately, you know, sometimes giving people a picture of what could be causing a behavior may help them understand a full picture of who you are. But also acknowledging, and acknowledgement is important because I've seen individuals rather be right, even though they know they have been doing wrong. And I've been a supervisor too. So remember, I was a CNA, went to nursing school, and I began to become my roles were being a director. So I had to supervise CNAs, caregivers, med techs, nurses. So I've heard every excuse and lie in the book. And there's times where I have caught my staff being deceptive and dishonest. And again, accountability equals maturity and professionalism. If you don't feel like the job fits you, then it is your responsibility to communicate that. Give a 2 weeks notice and transition well. Transition well, because the medical industry is smaller than you think. It is not uncommon and has not been in my whole time in this industry where I walk into a different employer or I'm working for another employer and that person I worked with is an employee of that company or whatever. You see people, they recycle through your life. So how was that last experience? And I always would have a deep sigh of relief, like, "Ooh, I'm glad I was a good worker," because this person would have had a different perception of me. And I don't know how they would have communicated with my now colleagues based on what they have known of me in the past. So I went on a little bit longer than what I wanted to with this topic, but I hope that it helps you think about being more aware of your responses, because your attitude, your perception of things can sabotage your financial progress and stability. If I'm leaving a job every time I have conflict, I'm missing out on financial stability for my own life, period. It means more than that for me. It's about residents. There's a purpose in why I became a CNA and why I'm a nurse and why I have a training school. But the other part of that is financial stability. And if I'm always responding emotionally, fight and flight, and I'm not taking a step back to try to work through the conflict, even if my employer is wrong and inaccurate, then I'm always putting myself in a financial situation. And I have to acknowledge that. So I hope that this pro tip really causes you to think a little bit deeper. I hope you were able to connect to some of my own grow up moments, and not immaturity, but just growing up in my profession. I hope that you were able to glean from that, because it takes being self-aware to grow and figure and start to really develop into the healthcare professional that you are. So I hope that helped you in some way and you can apply it. Let me know in the comments if this is something that was helpful, and also in what way did it challenge you, or tell me your situations. Share with me, what about this What do I do in this situation? I really want this channel to be a resource to you as a caregiver in the industry, because we need that. I needed people to guide me and mentor me so that I can grow like I did in this industry. Y'all have an awesome and amazing